Welcome back, everyone. So, we were discussing various issues related to population. The first one we discussed was population growth. Then we moved on to aging of our population. Then it was infant mortality rate and the increasing or the high maternal mortality rate. And maternal mortality rate, you need not worry, it will be covered with role of women. And now we are discussing sex ratio. So, when we started discussing about sex ratio, the first thing that we looked into was the sex ratio in general population, which was around 1020 according to NFHS 5 data. And whenever you mention a fact, please do mention where that fact is coming from. Then we thought of sex ratio in elderly. What can be the reasons? What can be the consequences behind it? Which is around 1065, both in favor of women. And then the third idea is that of sex ratio at birth, which is 9 to 9 according to your NFHS 5 data. And we said that not just that it is low or we have lower number of girls compared to boys, but also a few states have registered a decline when it comes to sex ratio at birth. So what we have to find out is what are the reasons behind it and what can be the consequences of a lower sex ratio at birth. Now what we have to do is, the first thing that we'll do is we'll look into the data of various states, again according to NFHS 5. This is also according to NFHS 5 data, National Family Health Survey 5, that was carried out from 2019 to 21. Now if you look at this data, you find that there are a few states like Kerala, Bihar, Odisha, Maharashtra, where it registered a decline in sex ratio at birth compared to what? Compared to your NFHS 4 data. So even if you write that there has been a decline in the sex ratio at birth in a few states, it will be right to that extent. But we cannot say that the sex ratio at birth is declining. Why? Because most of the states have registered an increase in sex ratio at birth. Also, what you have to consider is that NFHS 5 data will be say published in two phases, and this is data only for the first phase. So close to 17 states have already been covered, and we have to wait for the second phase data. And also we were saying that when it comes to our census, that is the most appropriate exercise. We have to wait for it and to find out that how the trends have been. Okay. Now this leads us to a question that there are states like Kerala and Bihar in the same category. There are states like Kerala and Bihar in the same bracket where you have registered a decline in sex ratio at birth. How do you explain this? But before we come to the explanation part, what we'll do is we'll look into various reasons behind this decline in sex ratio. What are the various factors which can lead to a decline or a decrease in sex ratio? Let's first look at those factors, and then we'll try to segregate what are the factors in Kerala, what are the factors in Bihar. And also, they would not ask you a particular question about the declining sex ratio in Bihar, because as I have already mentioned, that when it comes to social issues and particularly sociology, you would not be able to explain each and everything, right? So the data is something that we have to rely on. So if this it says that there has been a trend, a declining trend, we have to say yes, there is a declining trend, and we have to form reasons and your points around it. Okay. So when you think of the factors responsible for decrease in sex ratio, it can owe to directly to relatively lower status of women. It can owe directly to infanticide, etc. And we'll come to these factors one by one. Now, before this, if you have any question from the previous part, please ask me. Please let me know if you have any questions from the previous part. Because yes, it might become a little difficult for you to say cope up with all the facts and information that is available in this particular chapter. But trust me, as we move along and as you revise it a couple of times, you'll get more comfortable with it. All you have to do is you do not just have to miss on all the facets that we have included. So whatever trend is there, we have to look into the reasons and then into the consequences behind those reasons. Consequences behind that particular phenomena that is happening. Okay, so Vishal is saying that if asked about sex ratio, then is it sex ratio at birth or general sex ratio? If they say that it is sex ratio, then it means general sex ratio. They're not talking about a particular sex ratio at birth. And also the sex ratio at birth is important for your next year's examination, because these two, aging of our population and the decreasing or the declining trend in sex ratio at birth in a couple of states, in a few states, is something that we have to uh, prepare for the next examination. No, Aditya, you haven't missed a lot. The only thing that we did in the previous slide was to summarize what we had discussed so far. So we had discussed the general sex ratio in elderly, and then we came down to sex ratio at birth. In sex ratio at birth, we say that it is still low. There can be reasons behind it. And also, we find that a few states have registered a decline. So we have to look into the reasons behind this low sex ratio at birth. And also, we have to think about what can be the possible consequences. And this is all that we have mentioned so far. Coming back to the factors responsible for this decrease in sex ratio, we have a few general, say, ideas about what are these reasons or factors behind this. And this is what we have to understand. This is what we have to remember to answer any kind of question that comes in the examination. Unless they conduct a very widespread exercise, they start researching on it, and they find out the exact reasons behind this declining trend in sex ratio in a few states. Otherwise, we just have to work out this general framework for this decrease in sex ratio at birth. Okay, so the first idea is that of cultural belief. That generally, traditionally, particularly in Indian society, we find that women have been accorded a lower status compared to men. Then also we were saying there are problems such as dowry, which is basically, say, the bride when she or the boy and girl, when they get married, the girl's family has to give out some money or gold, etc., or any other immovable or movable property to the boy's family. So this can also be a reason which can lead to a decrease in sex ratio. Then we see that ours is a patriarchal society wherein it is generally the male members who exercise authority over the female members. So, which is also a reason behind this decrease in sex ratio. Okay, so Matloob has asked a question that despite having low sex ratio at birth, we are witnessing higher average sex ratio. Then on improving the sex ratio at birth, how will we control average sex ratio? Now, see, the thing is, one, this data is coming from sample surveys. Second, the higher general sex ratio owes to the fact that the sex ratio in the elderly population is very high. And also, we need not worry about controlling this phenomena, because yes, ultimately, if say the society is egalitarian, you find that there is an equal probability biologically of giving birth to a girl and a boy. Considering that fact, we see that if we remove all the anomalies from our society, we would not face any kind of problem related to this. Now, apart from these factors, one factor that we had mentioned was preference to son. When we were talking about fertility rate, we were saying that we witness a higher fertility rate because we prefer sons over daughters. And we had also looked into various factors which impact this preference to sons. Preference to son because we have to pass on the property. Preference to son because they'll be the ones who will take care of the elderly at their towards the end of their life. Preference to son because there are many rituals which are being performed by sons. And also in agrarian society and traditional society, you find that generally it is the male members of the family who work. It is male member of the family who work in any kind of paid labor. So when it comes to agriculture, ultimately they provide additional labor. Whatever existing labor they have, if they give birth to son, they will provide additional labor, because generally girls are kept out and women are kept out of this ambit of work. So Jayant is asking that the birth of a girl or a boy depends on men rather than women, but still we find that it is generally women who are held responsible for the same. This owes to the fact that the traditional outlook of society has remained the same. So again, I also must have repeated this statement again, time and again, that these social changes or whatever existing social institutions we have, they might have very regressive ideas behind them. One. Second, traditional society will experience inertia when it comes to change. So to change their ideas to this, when you change your ideas to modern ideas, there is going to be resistance, there's going to be inertia from the traditional society. And also, we find that it is generally based in our cultural traditions that we find such situation of women in our society. And we will come to the status and role of women in society in the next chapter. Then we are saying that various religious aspects like various customs and rituals are to be performed by male child. Then there is transfer of property, which happens on the patrilineal side, on the son side, because it gets passed on from father to son and so on. Then low participation rate of women in formal labor sector. Now this leads to a lower economic and hence the social status of women, which also can be considered to be a factor responsible for this decrease in sex ratio. Then when it comes to other economic factors, you will find less number of women entrepreneurs compared to men, which accords them a lower status. Even when it comes to other matters of economy, when you think of promotions, when you think of other factors, empowerment of women, we find that generally it is the women who have to suffer. Then your property as well gets passed on to the son side, even though with your Hindu Succession Act of 2005, now even daughters are an equal, also get an equal share of, say, father's property. But the thing is that when you think about the practice of this law, it is not being implemented like that. And it is not just about penalizing the ones who are not, say, transferring the property to women. The government also runs various kinds of incentivizing programs. And you find that because of these incentivizing programs, there has been an increase in the number of properties registered in women's name. And we'll come to that. Just think about this. What is this incentivizing program? And we'll come to this with role of women. It is a very simple answer. And let's see if you know this. So Sneha is asking, is this factor of sex ratio at birth? See, these are the factors generally responsible behind the decrease in sex ratio. I'll tell you how to make this answer, if at all a question is asked, how to make this answer specific to child sex ratio or sex ratio at birth, I'll do that. I'll tell you another reasons for the same. Do not worry about it, but you need to remember these general factors responsible for an unequal sex ratio. Now, apart from this, when you think about sex ratio at birth, you'll find that female feticide and infanticide can also be reasons. Herein, I ask you a question which you need not answer right now, and you can answer with the role of women. But let me give you time to think over it. That when it comes to technology, the role of technology, we can say that technology can have both positive and negative consequences. And if you would have gone through the weekly desk questions, I'd asked a question about role of technology in socialization of children. What kind of role technology plays in, say, diluting the functions of the institution of family? I had asked this question, and I hope you had been able to answer this. Similarly, if I ask you this question, that how can technology impact the role of women and how it can lead to various ills and it can have various positives? So this is something that you would have to think about. I'll give you the definite answer to this moving through our role of women chapter. So when it comes to factors responsible for decrease in sex ratio, we find that giving preference to son because they have to pass on the property, giving preference to son because they have to perform various religious rituals, giving preference to son because of inequalities in our society, because of social evils like dowry which still exist in our society, we find that the sex ratio at birth is still skewed. And not just that, it has registered a decline in a few states. Now, the next part is what are the consequences of this low sex ratio, of this decrease in sex ratio? But before coming to that, I would like to ask you this question, that few states like Kerala and Bihar, which come from the opposite dimensions for that matter, in terms of socioeconomic indicators, why do we find similar trends in these two states? What are the reasons responsible for a decline in sex ratio at birth in Kerala? And what are the reasons for a decline in sex ratio at birth in Bihar? You have to suggest answers for both. Let's start with Bihar. Why do you think that there has been a decline in sex ratio in Bihar? What can be the reasons? Please suggest what can be the reasons behind this decline in sex ratio at birth in Bihar? Lower status of women, poverty. CN says that increase in education employment. I did not get the point. Can you please elaborate? Okay, so Akansha says literacy, higher population. Okay, how would higher population impact this? Okay, so see, what we have done is we just now have gone through various factors responsible for a decrease in sex ratio. So can't we use the similar factors? Can't we use the same factors here? That because of our patriarchal setup, because of lower status of women, because of increased cases of infanticide and feticide, because of social evils like dowry still existing in our society, the level of education being low, the levels of education and awareness being low, can be responsible for a decline in sex ratio at birth. Now, fine. But how do you explain this decline in Kerala then? Because the levels of education are better, the levels of awareness in the society are better. Also in Kerala, we find that we the exceptions in, if you remember, when it comes to matriarchal societies, matrilocal and matrilineal society, we had those exceptions coming from Kerala. And also with better levels of education, you'll have equal status to men and women. But why do we find this decline in sex ratio at birth in Kerala? Because migration cannot be a factor, because we are talking about sex ratio at birth. If it were general sex ratio, we could have easily explained. But now what you have to understand is that yes, it can be due to preferring a single child. And also, you have to remember here the role of technology in case of Kerala. So all those factors can come into play. Couple that with the role of technology, because in Kerala you find that the decline has been very sharp. From 1047, it has reduced to 951, whereas in Bihar the decline is of 26 points. So you can think of role of technology, because for someone to perform female feticide, or feticide is killing a child in the womb before their birth. Infanticide is killing the child after they are born. So these are two different practices, if anyone at all is confused. So feticide is killing in the fetus, in the womb. Infanticide is once they are born, killing them after they are born. So you can think of role of technology, because Kerala, for that matter, is superior when it comes to any kind of technology compared to Bihar and other states. So you find that they have better means of taking up, or say scanning, or taking up, say, your ultrasound, determining the sex of the fetus, and ultimately aborting it. And also, because Kerala uh, has is for that matter does not have a lot of significance of religion, you find that abortion is not a taboo. You can carry out abortion. The society in general do not have any kind of problem related to the same. So yes, feticide and abortion, ultimately the role of technology in carrying out this feticide becomes the main reason behind this decline in sex ratio at birth in Kerala. And also, for that matter, when we talk about technology, the role of technology, we say that in this case, we can say that technology is playing a negative role. And you find examples of technology, how proliferation of technology is actually, say, leading to various negative consequences. So, for instance, I read about a pocket ultrasound device. So you know that because of PNDT Act, you're not supposed to determine the sex of children in the womb to curb this penis of lower sex ratio. But now you have pocket ultrasound devices with which you can determine the sex of the children in the womb at home itself. Once you know, you can very well go and get it aborted. No questions asked. So role of technology will become the most important point here. Yes, there are other factors, because people still believe in dominance of men over women. Women still have a lower status in the society compared to men. Yes, these are factors, but ultimately it is because of technology that you find this lower sex ratio of at birth in Kerala. So I hope you got your answers. Now moving on to the consequences of this unequal sex ratio. Now if you remember, I had given you example of a couple of tribes from Himachal Pradesh, from Nilgiris, wherein we find polyandry. Why? Polyandry was what? Polyandry was multiple husbands to a single wife. There's one girl who gets married to multiple husbands. Why would it prevail? Apart from other factors, we were saying lower sex ratio is also responsible for this practice of polyandry. So if there are less number of girls and more number of boys in a society, practices such as polyandry will prevail. Then also you find that people would not find matches, particularly boys would not be able to find matches. And this kind of situation has been faced in states like Haryana. And if you remember, while growing up, you would have say seen a lot of these scandals that used to happen of women trafficking. So what they'll do is, to compensate for this low sex ratio, they'll simply pay a price for a bride, and get girls from eastern part of the country where there is a lot of poverty and people are ready to do anything for money, and they'll get brides from there, get them married. So women trafficking can become a problem because of this unequal sex ratio. Similarly, we see that marriage has certain functions. If one is not able to perform marriage, what happens to sexual gratification? So, because of this problem, and please mind that I'm not saying that women are objects of sexual pleasure of men. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that biological functions of family can take a hit, which can ultimately lead to more sexual violence against women, more instances of rapes, etc. This can happen. Also, it can lead to mental health problems in men because they are not being able to, say, get married because they do not find a suitable match. So, increase in trafficking, making this society at large violent. Boys having frustration, etc., because they are not able to make a family, start a family. So, all those functions of family and marriage will take a hit. Okay, so Asif is giving an example of a tribe from Himachal Pradesh wherein polyandry is practiced. And also, you can take example from Nilgiris. So all these can be consequences of unequal sex ratio. Now, what we have to do is, if we want to improve the sex ratio, what we need to do is we have to look at various factors responsible for this decrease in sex ratio or for this low sex ratio. What are various factors? If women are accorded, say, patriarchy, various social traditions, various religious rituals, right to property, dowry, etc. So if we take care of all these problems, we can very well improve our sex ratio. So women, if at all they are provided with equal opportunities like men, relative to men, they'll be in a better position. If we strictly stop this practice of dowry, then we can improve the sex ratio. Then families would not have to worry about the money or the property that they would have to transfer during the wedding. Similarly, we are saying that decrease in sex ratio happens because of practices like feticide and infanticide. So we have to curb them. So basically, we have to implement this PNDT Act even more strictly. Because previously, what used to happen was that in urban areas, you will have the sophisticated instruments to carry out ultrasound, etc., wherein they can basically suggest the gender of the child as well, but it was not there in rural areas. But this proliferation of technology to rural areas has actually led to an even steeper decline in rural areas. So basically, all those problems, all those factors responsible for decrease in sex ratio can be focused on, and we can come up with suggestions. Yes, as if the crimes against women, etc., sexual violence has been covered in the consequences. So what you have to do is you take up, you think about all the factors responsible for this decrease in sex ratio, and then you think about various suggestions to the same. I have given a few lists. I have given a few suggestions here, but there can be more to it because you have multiple factors. Educate women, make the society at large aware, implement the laws properly, do not let practices like dowry, etc., happen. So all these factors, all these can become suggestions to increase the sex ratio in our society. So I hope this idea about population and associated issues is clear. So in population and associated issues, we thought of population growth, then we thought of uh, various factors that say relate to population growth, how we can improve or how we can stop and reduce the rate of population growth. Then we thought of aging as a problem, aging of population, that we would have more number of elderly as proportion of our population, which would not be able to contribute to economic development, which will need more financial support from the family, from the state, then various issues related to elderly, etc. Then we moved on to sex ratio. So please remember, please do this thing that after the class is over today, Please create the entire framework for this chapter on population, because there are multiple themes that we have discussed, and because of lack of continuity in sessions, you'll find that things or points might get misplaced. So what you have to do is, please create this framework. So when we were discussing the problem of aging, we had discussed multiple themes within aging. So all those themes have to be covered, be it rural urban divide. That means feminization of elderly population, ruralization of elderly population. All these themes have to be covered along with aging. Please remember that. Now let's come to our questions, previous year questions that have been asked, and see how these questions have to be approached. So the first question says critically examine. Critically examine. That means you would have to look into both sides of it. Whether growing population growth is a cause of poverty, or poverty is the main cause of population growth in India. So that's what they have mentioned. Now let's break this question down and see how many perspectives, how many dimensions can we take out of this. So one idea is population growth can lead to poverty, but another idea is that population growth might not lead to poverty. So population growth in an affluent society would not lead to poverty, because they'll have sufficient resources to be distributed against or distributed amongst the children. Then the other idea says poverty can lead to population growth, but also poverty need not necessarily lead to population growth, as in case of post-industrial society, or as in case of advanced industrial society, wherein we say that even if you're poor, the tendency to give birth to more number of children is less now, because they know that to get them to work, they'll need highly specialized skills. How do they manage that? To give them a decent or a basic lifestyle, or to put food on their plate, it costs a lot more. Now families are becoming more aware about it, so it might not necessarily lead to population growth. So out of this question, we have four themes. The first one says population growth as a cause of poverty. Second one says population growth might not necessarily lead to poverty. Third one says poverty can become a cause of population growth. And the fourth one says poverty need not necessarily lead to population growth. So out of this question, which we have to critically examine, we have created these four dimensions. Please tell me if this is something that you have understood. Asif is asking, can we revise using the annotations or make our own notes? It is absolutely up to you how you want to go about it. You can use the annotations, but when it comes to annotations, please do take a printout, or at least whatever current affairs are there, keep linking it, because I told you that you have to write examples. So if you can use the PPTs, annotated PPTs, it'll be good to go. But if you want to create your own notes, that is also fine. It would not take a long time if you keep revising on a regular basis. If you revise on a regular basis, you need not worry about all the time that you are going to invest in creating these notes. Okay. Critically examine whether growing population is the cause of poverty, or poverty is the main cause of population growth in India. So out of which we have created four themes. So with these four themes, we can very well write your introduction, body, and conclusion. I hope everything is clear till here. In conclusion, let's start with conclusion. In conclusion, you can talk about other factors which impact poverty and population growth, because we know that poverty is not the only reason behind population growth. If you remember, from fertility rate, we see that there are multiple factors which can lead to population growth: lack of family planning, lack of awareness, lack of availability of contraceptives. All these factors can lead to population growth. Similarly, when it comes to poverty, we see that population growth is not the only factor. There can be other causes of poverty as well. So to conclude, you can talk about various other factors which can lead to an increase in poverty, or which can lead to an increase in growing population, so that the evaluator understands, the dimensions, there is conceptual clarity. Now, coming to the introductory part, what you have to do is you have to think about the vicious cycle of poverty. Now, I know that right now a few of you might not be aware about this vicious cycle of poverty. This vicious cycle of poverty says that the causes of poverty become the effects of poverty. And it is very hard to break out of this vicious cycle. So population growth as a cause of poverty becomes the effect of poverty. So in one part, you have to show poverty growth as a cause of poverty, population growth as a cause of poverty, and this population growth becoming a consequence of poverty. That is what vicious cycle means. So right now, if you do not know about vicious cycle, need not worry about it. Just remember this statement, and we will substantiate it. We will explain everything when it comes to poverty. So once we discuss poverty, all the ideas regarding this vicious cycle will be covered. So this vicious cycle of poverty can be the introduction, because you cannot say that this question is based on population or poverty. It can be written both ways. So either you can approach it from the perspective of population growth or poverty. So if you approach from the perspective of poverty, you can think about the vicious cycle of poverty. Also, if you approach from the side of population growth, you can very well mention other factors responsible for population growth. That is one part. Now, coming to the body part, how can you say that population growth can lead to poverty? Please suggest. How is it that population growth can lead to poverty? Because we have discussed this theme with population growth. Anyone? So yes, because we have limited resources, ultimately, if the population rate increases, if the population growth is high, it'll ultimately lead to scarcity of resources and overburdening of resources, which is basically poverty. Then in poverty is the condition where they do not have sufficient resources for their survival. And with this increase in population, the state and the family would not be able to take care of social security needs and various other needs of the members of the family and society. That is one idea. Great. So we are talking about lack of economic facilities, lack of economic opportunities, etc. So yes, population growth can lead to poverty, simply understood. Then what you have to do is briefly, these two parts, these two alternate perspectives do not have to get a lot of weightage. So if you give these ideas, say 30% each, you give these two alternate perspectives 10% each. That means in a statement, you talk about the inverse role of, or the inverse relationship between population growth and poverty. So you can say that with population growth, the economy will develop better, because you'll have young population, the idea of demographic dividend, which can help the government have more resources to alleviate poverty. If there is demographic dividend, if there is population growth, there'll be more of younger population. If there is more younger population, it is considered demographic dividend, which will directly contribute to the economic development of the society. And with this economic development, the government can very well take care of poverty. They can have multiple eradication programs for poverty. So you can just write that in one statement. Then you move on to the next part, wherein we have to portray how poverty can become a cause of population growth. As already discussed with fertility rates, we were saying that if the family is poor, because you can think of it at the level of family, or you can think of it at the level of state. That is entirely up to you. That is entirely up to you. So at the level of, say, state or the level of society, you can say that if there is poverty, people will need more and more number of helping hands, which can lead to population growth. If there is poverty, people would not have education and awareness, which can lead to population growth. If there is poverty, people would not have adequate healthcare facilities. There'll be high infant mortality rate, which is ultimately going to lead to a higher birth rate and hence a higher population. So all those factors which we had discussed there can be covered here. Then you come to the alternate perspective, which says poverty need not be a cause of population growth. Because of poverty, don't you think that the death rates will be higher? Because of poverty, don't you think it will be an incentive enough, or it will be a penalty enough for a family not to give birth to more number of children because they would not have sufficient resources? So in a line or two, you conclude this argument as well. So in this question, you start with the vicious cycle of poverty, that how the causes of poverty become the effects of poverty. And then in body part, you take up all these perspectives. You give more weightage to the ones which have been mentioned in the question. And then you give a slightly less weightage to the alternate perspectives. And then you move on to conclusion, wherein you talk about all the other factors which impact population growth and poverty. So I hope this question is clear, because generally the way in which this question is discussed, they will talk only about these two perspectives, which is incorrect, because they're talking about critically examining the statement. If you try to critically examine these two perspectives, obviously you'll have two more perspectives which are right opposite to the idea that has been given in the statement. And in this manner, you have to conclude this answer. So please tell me, please give me a quick thumbs up if you understood this question, if you understood the demand of the question, and if you understood the structure of the answer. So Aditya is talking about overpopulation, the demand of labor, and ultimately increase in population growth. Yes, you can create that vicious cycle in whatever way you want. So what I'll do is, when we come to poverty, I'll create a couple of vicious cycles for you, and I'll make you understand that how is it that you have to create those vicious cycles. So great, it was not a difficult question, but generally, please note this, that generally students get below average marks in this question because they are not able to cover all the perspectives. And also, if at all you have any facts, they can talk about it. Okay, so Sneha is asking, if they ask about effect of any topic, so they say, what are the consequences of urbanization? And you talk about negative consequences in the body, then the conclusion has to be positive or not. Yes, generally it is suggested that if you have written something negative in the body part, you balance that, counterbalance that with writing a few lines about the positive dimension in the conclusion. So maybe you can talk about suggestions are positive, then you can talk about government intervention, which is also positive in nature. So it depends on the demand of the question how you have to go about it. So there is no fixed rule. And also that's why I say, please, and this is a humble request, that you please, everyone, please keep going through previous your topper copies to give you a perspective, because merely listening in the class and not practicing, not revising, not looking into previous year questions, not looking into topper copies is not going to help you with mains answer writing. If you go on waiting for a long time to wait for that right moment when you start writing, trust me, that moment is never going to come. Either you start today, or you never start at all. This is how it works. Just think about it. It must have been at least 6 to 7 months since you have started the preparation. How many number of answers have you written so far? If I asked you this personal question, yes, it is personal in nature, I would not disclose the names. Please suggest how many answers have you written so far, including your weekly tests, including what? And also mention the number of months since you have been preparing. Please suggest. So Asif says they have a book with solved previous year questions. Can I go through that? I would suggest not to, because I'll tell you, please look at the questions. But the problem with these answers or solved papers is that they do not care about the demand of the question. You please go through the same question. You have this question here. You must be having the solution in that previous year booklet that you have. You look at the answer of this question, it would not even be logically correct. So yes, I'm not saying that all the answers are like that, but ultimately they somehow temper with your understanding. They somehow do not give you a complete picture. So please suggest how long it has been since you started preparing for the examination, and what are the number of answers that you have written so far, please. Yeah, so the book might be provided by us, but again, I'm saying that it is better you try writing on your own and get them evaluated, which is the best way, because you have avenues available for the same. You can always write your answers, send it across to islife@byju's.com, get them evaluated. Okay, so 200 answers so far, that is amazing. Okay, then there are others who are writing one answer on a daily basis. Then there are ones who have, it has only been 6 months and they have written around 300 questions. So great. So the ones who are writing regularly, the ones who are practicing regularly, the others who have not been writing or who have not written sufficient answers, you do not have to feel that, okay, you have done something wrong. The best thing is you take, say, confidence from the others who have been writing. You see that obviously they would have improved. If you compare your answers that you would have written a few months back and the answers that you're writing today, there's going to be a lot of difference. Trust me on that. So take cue from the ones who have been writing 21 months and 150 answers. Great, good job. So please try writing the answers, because ultimately it is a competitive examination. It is not about how well you write, it is about how better is it compared to others. So if you want to take that competitive advantage, you have to put in efforts. There is no shortcut. There's no way you can go around it and simply write and perform in the examination. It does not happen in most cases. Yes, there can be exceptions where people do not practice writing and by sheer luck they get good marks in mains, but that is not the rule. Those are exceptions. So what we have to do is, in this preparation, you have to follow the general rules, general principles of the examination, because ultimately whatever is being taught in the class, you are not going to retain it for long. The kind of questions that you find in the examination will become a problem when you look at them for the first time in the examination. So I suggest that please do write more and more number of answers on a regular basis. So Asif is asking whether we can relate Yojana and Kurukshetra with answers of social issues. Absolutely yes. For instance, when it comes to your chapter on nutrition and hunger, I would suggest you to go through the gist or the entire Yojana magazine for the month of August. Why? Because it was based on nutrition. So you'll get a lot of facts, you'll get a lot of things that can be related to this. And also, when you talk about the aging population, one of the additions might say cover all the government schemes and initiatives and a little analysis of the same for a particular section of the society. One can be based on women empowerment. Then there can be other magazines based on, say, issues related to aging. So yes, you can obviously relate with them. Okay, so Chinmay is asking what should be the time limit for a 15 and 10 marker. So right now, when you have started practicing, you do not have to worry about the time. All you have to understand is, once you look at the question, you do not have to start writing right away. You have to conceptualize the answer. The way we are creating the structure has to come into your mind, and then you have to start writing, which can take close to 1 minute. This conceptualization can take close to 1 minute, and maybe less at times and maybe more at times, depending on the difficulty level of the question. The average time you get in the examination, you already know, ranges between 7 to 9 minutes max, which is the time limit in which you have to write answers. But right now, we are not practicing to write answers faster. Right now, we are practicing to make our answers better. So let's take how much of a time it takes to conceptualize the answers and to write the answers, and slowly and steadily work on this aspect. Because it will take another 2-3 months for you to reach that stage where you can write good quality answers, good content loaded answers within that same time bracket. So let's not worry about the time limit right now. Okay, so this question is clear, and let's move on to the next question. Now you see that it has been in the news, and I have also mentioned it a couple of times, that the exercise of census has not taken place yet. It owes to the fact that there was a lockdown during COVID for close to 2 years. The exercise was supposed to happen, and the results were supposed to be out by 21-22, but it did not happen in time. And now they're saying that it'll take around 2-3 years to conclude the exercise and to publish the results. Now, the question for us is, what are the consequences of a delayed census? Because this is the kind of question that UPSC would ask. Because what you find in your news debates and newspapers is the political idea that one government or the opposition blaming the government, saying that they are not ready to take out census results, they are not ready to conduct this exercise for the sheer fear of losing. Because people would see that ultimately the people have been lagging behind in various social indicators, socioeconomic indicators, which will be a setback to the ruling party. Similarly, the ruling party says that they want the census exercise to be conducted so that they can consolidate their vote bank, so that they can think about which constituency, in which constituency they have to target what kind of people. So generally, it is the political blame game which goes on around in your newspaper. But what we have to understand is, what can be the consequences of a delayed census in India? To understand this, you have to think of the significance of census. So if you understand the significance of census, why at all this exercise is conducted, where all that data is used, you'll be able to reach the conclusion that yes, these are the consequences of a delayed census. Okay, so Asif says that it can lead to inefficiency in allocation of resources. Great. Then your various sample survey data does not give you a clear picture about the status of various sections of the society, various caste-based groups, etc. Amazing. Then think about your various schemes. How do you identify the target groups? That this is the target group which has to fall in the bracket of Antyodaya Anna Yojana. All that data comes from census. All the kind of research which is being carried out relies on this census data. So all those things take a back seat. So if you are not able to conduct this exercise, not able to publish the result, how would various departments under various ministries know that this is the targeted population to which we have to provide direct benefit transfer? How would they know that whatever exercises they had conducted or whatever programs and policies they had previously, what kind of impact they had on the society? Unless until this exercise of census is carried out. So you have to see that any problem for that matter, whatever is there in the news, you have to see that how does it relate to your particular subject. And someone, when they had asked this question, that what about same-sex marriage, how does it fall in paper 1, and I was very happy that you are able to relate same-sex marriage to paper 1, because generally everyone relates same-sex marriage to paper 2, talking about the constitutional dimension. I'm not saying that it is wrong. Yes, they can very well ask a question in paper 2 about same-sex marriage, about the legal provisions, etc., about the say evolution. But ultimately, marriage as an institution is a salient feature of the Indian society, and you have already seen questions being asked on marriage. Marriage as a sacrament is losing its value in modern society. Question was asked this year. So same-sex marriage is a departure from the traditional system of marriage, from the traditional institution of marriage, which will change its function and its feature. So it very well falls under the ambit of paper 1. Okay, so a basic answer for this has been mentioned here that you can go through. You already know this. Now what we'll do is we'll move on to the next chapter, which is role of women and women's organization. But before we start with it, let's take a quick 10-minute break and meet at 7:05. Let's take a break, fill our water bottles, and get ready, brace ourselves for the last leg of the session today, wherein we'll discuss role of women and women organization. And if at all you have any questions, please post it here. We will take them up after the break. So let's take a break. Welcome back, everyone. Let's continue our discussion from where we left. Okay, so there is a question before starting with the role of women and women's organization. There's a question by Vishal which says why the Succession Act, Hindu Succession Act 2005, has not been strictly enforced as it can help in women empowerment. Okay, so Vishal, you'll get answer to this question when we take up this matter. Again, we have to see that it is not about why, because if the government has come up with a plan, they obviously want to implement it properly, but it is actually because of issues related to implementation that things do not work out as they wish. So what we'll do is, in our last chapter, and I have included a question on the same, and the question that you have asked, I have exactly similar sounding question has been mentioned there, which we are going to discuss, wherein you'll understand the various issues related to implementation of policies, particularly relating to women. Because we find that there are implementation problems all across the range of policies that we have. But when it comes to women, there are specific reasons for poor implementation of policy. So I've given a structure and answer to the same, and we are going to discuss that question. So I hope you can hold it till then. Okay, moving on to the next part, it talks about role of women and women's organization. Now, when we think of women's organization, you have to go back to your modern history, wherein there have been organizations, particularly led by women, and also there were organizations which were meant for women empowerment, which were there. So, which that part has to be covered there. Apart from this, when it comes to women's organization, you have to think of women's organization as civil society. That there are various movements that happen every year, every now and then. The Me Too movement, what is it? Example of women's organization. Similarly, there can be movements relating to environment. What are those? Women's organization. So all the new organizations, all the new movements that come up can be mentioned here. Also, when it comes to the role of civil society organizations, like particularly your self-help groups, it is also a form of women's organization meant for the empowerment of women. And this part will be covered with paper 2 topic, which talks about your non-governmental organizations, self-help groups, cooperative societies, etc. So we are going to cover that part there. And also a question on women empowerment and self-help groups has already been asked, but in paper 2. So when it comes to women's organization, either the question will have more of a, say, historical perspective, which will be covered in modern history, else it will be more aligned to your current affairs. And so far, there has been no question from this part. And what we'll do is, we are going to break it up. So modern history part will be done there. Current affairs are being taken care of. Apart from that, your self-help groups and other forms of women organization will be discussed in paper 2, social justice. With social justice, I am only going to take up social justice, so need not worry about it. Now, what we have to do is we have to think about the role of women in this chapter. Now, when you look at role of women, we have to basically look at the transition and the changes on role of women coming from a traditional society to a modern society. And you see that there have been various changes from traditional to modern society, that the role of women has changed. So what we'll do is we'll look at this changing role of women. That is one part. Changing role of women. Changing role of women in politics. Changing role of women in social sector. Changing role of women when it comes to performing paid labor. All these ideas of changing role of women will be discussed. Along with this, what we'll discuss is various issues and problems in the form of inequalities amongst women. So far, we have seen, already looked into sex ratio. We're going to cover it again in a very basic manner because it has been discussed in a greater detail. We have also looked into various form of inequalities, like inequality when it comes to holding property, inequality when it comes to performing paid labor, inequality when it comes to the authority distribution within the family, inequality when it comes to various social evils like dowry. All those issues will be covered here, and you do not have to go into all the factual details. Yes, I have included a lot of facts and stats from various surveys, etc., various reports, but you do not have to remember anything. Let them be there. Whenever you revise, you will obviously go through those. A few of those facts will become, say, by hearted, and those will be all the facts that you need to remember. Also, when it comes to population, you know that the fact related to sex ratio is important. So is it here. So sex ratio is important from role of women perspective and population perspective. So few facts, yes, obviously you would have to remember, but most of the facts you do not have to. And I've already told you the way to go around that fact. So you can always say that according to NFHS, this was observed without quoting the numbers. You can say that according to NFHS 5, 7 states or a few states have registered a decline in sex ratio at birth. And obviously, when we were discussing Kerala and Bihar, that exception and 2 examples of states where this decline is happening will stick to your mind. So I have basically arranged the content and the subjects in such a manner that whatever important facts and figures are there, they'll become by hearted. Because if I ask anyone right now that what is the sex ratio in children or sex ratio at birth, you'll be able to tell it. Why? Because it has been discussed multiple times. Okay, starting with role of women, I'll tell you the basic framework of this chapter. Aditya asks, does women reservation make this chapter important? Yes, it does. So yes, if at all a question is asked on the women reservation bill, which is a domain of your paper 2, which will be discussed widely in current affairs and your polity lectures, but also we have to see what can be the consequences. So the consequences of this Women Reservation Act can also be asked in paper 1 without directly asking about women reservation. And women reservation, for that matter, is also important in the sense that it is again a government intervention to alleviate women, to empower women, right? So what we'll do is, the first idea that we are going to look into is that what is this idea of role? You do not have to remember the definition, you just have to understand what is this role of women that they are talking about. Before that, just look into the questions. So one of the questions says empowering women is the key to control population growth. So in the previous chapter, I had shown you this question which talks about relationship between population growth and women empowerment. In the previous chapter, we have already discussed a question on relationship between poverty and population growth. In this chapter, we are going to discuss this question asked in the previous year. So you can say that this is a question based on women empowerment. Some might say that this is a question based on population growth, but ultimately we know that in this question, we have to discuss both the aspects. Another question is discuss the positive and negative effects of globalization on women in India. And this is also a question which has been covered. Apart from impact of globalization on women, we have also discussed the impact of urbanization on women. When discussing family and discussing the institution of marriage, we see that how the institutions are changing, how the composition of these institutions is changing, how the functions are changing, and how the role of women is changing in those institutions. Now let's specifically talk about one component of our family, one member of our family, that is women, which are not less than 50% of our population. So one of the major chunk of our population, and we see that when it comes to various socioeconomic indicators, they are lagging behind. This is something we generally know, but we are going to look at these things in the light of facts, stats coming particularly from your NFHS 5. And also, you have to remember that do not assume things. So I'll ask you a question here because it'll also stick to your mind. If I ask you a question here, when we talk about inequality in education, what do you think? Is it women who are lagging behind, or is it men who are lagging behind when it comes to opportunities for availing education? What do you think? CN says women, Sneha says, Aditya, everyone says women. But now when we look at the facts, you'll find when it comes to higher education, which is a special opportunity, it is boys who are lagging behind, which might be a surprising fact for you. But again, this fact is from a government report, which is going to be discussed with education. But this gives you a fair idea that we do not have to assume things. Things are changing. Because when we were talking about sex ratio, most of you were saying that the general sex ratio is in favor of men. But when we looked at the data, when we looked at facts, we found that the sex ratio in general population favors women. It is 1020 over 1000 males, right? So yes, we know that there are few things which can be generalized, which we know are happening. But wherever there are facts, we are going to use those facts, we are going to use those stats to substantiate whatever we say. Yes, even your top ranking institutions were generally the women specific ones. Yes, absolutely right, Sneha. Okay, starting with this discussion, now just think about two things. We always talk about the status of a person or position of a person in society. Status is basically the respect, the position that society accords to a person. So in the case of caste system, we were saying that few castes were accorded a lower position compared to other castes on the basis of purity and pollution, on the basis of other disabilities, on the basis of their caste. So the status of women is basically the respect and prestige given to a particular social group in society. Now, with this status comes a role. Because if you, for instance, if you get a good status in society, you say that you become a civil servant, you clear this examination, your status will obviously get elevated. Everyone would look with respect at you. So compared to others, you'll have a better status in society. But when you talk about role, it is basically the functional aspect of status, because to every status, there is a role which is assigned. To every status, there is a responsibility that you have to take care of. So basically, role is nothing but the behavioral aspect of status. With role, you basically justify your status. So if someone is accorded a lower status in society, you'll find a synonymous role. They'll be given a role of less importance. Look at your organization in the school or in your college or at your workplace. People who are accorded a lower status are given a role which is in sync with their status. Similarly, people sitting at the top, the prime minister, they are accorded the status of someone at the top, but they have similar kind of roles and responsibilities. This is what the idea of role is. But if you see that when you talk about role, there are various factors which influence the role of an individual. And in our case, we are going to talk particularly about the role of women in Indian society. Now, there can be multiple factors. Now, think about caste. And you have to suggest, because I have mentioned this example when discussing caste system. How do you think caste impacts role of women? We see that caste impacts the role of the entire social group. Absolutely, yes. So there can be castes which are accorded a lower status and they get a synchronous role. But how does caste influence the role of women in society? Can someone suggest this? Because it is not a difficult answer, but you just have to think about it. Just have to storm your brain once. Anyone? Jera says that upper caste women will have more respect. Some castes have lower prestige for women. So, okay, one way is that in different castes, women will be accorded a different status. And on the basis of their status, they'll have a different role. Also, you'll find that in your so-called lower caste, women were generally allowed to work outside the ambit of household. They also contributed to paid labor. They also contributed to agriculture. Whereas in your so-called upper caste families, women were not allowed to step out the sphere of household. That's how caste impacts the role of women. Similarly, you think about religion. When it comes to religion, religion accords a lower position to women. Religion considers women subordinate to men. Most of the religions, most of the structured religions, in the sense that if you go to a temple, how often do you find female priests in those temples? If you go to a church, how often do you find the priests to be women? And you'll find on very rare occasions. It is generally the men or the male members. It was generally the male members who take up the position of a priest. So religion also accords a lower status and hence influences the role of women. Similarly, when it comes to class, women coming from a lower class, coming from a poorer household, would have more responsibilities, will have more burden of work. Why? Because they have to take care of their household work, and they also have to go out, work in others' homes. They would have to also go out, take up, say, manual labor. So they'll have dual burden of work. Similarly, if you think of the institutions of family and marriage, you already know when it comes to institutions of family and marriage, women have lesser authority compared to men. The families are patriarchal, patrilocal, and patrilineal in nature, apart bearing a few exceptions. Similarly, when it comes to the institution of marriage, again, women are generally accorded a lower position. And with this lower position, they get the role of performing the unpaid labor. So, with status, there is an associated role, and generally, you find that women are accorded a lower status, and accordingly, they get a lower role in society. Yes. Now, Chinmay, the question is done. Let's wait for the other question to be asked. Okay. So, the institution or the practice of dowry, etc. So, Pritesh is asking how to master this subject for UPSC. So, the first point is that you do not have to master this subject because ultimately UPSC is seeking a jack of all trades. That's why you have multiple subjects which they expect you to be, say, fluent at, say, general studies level or a 12th standard level. We barely touch, say, bachelors in a few subjects. That's it. But most of the syllabus is limited to a 12th standard. So they do not want you to be a master of everything, of a master of a particular subject. They want you to perform fairly well, above average in all these subjects. That's what they expect of you. And also, if you want to, say, write better answers, all you have to do is write answers. That is the only way to master writing skills in this particular subject. There's no other way. So keep revising on a regular basis, keep writing, look at previous year questions, storm your brain, try to get involved in this discussion, because you can ask the people or ask the students who are engaging in the discussion. They would have had a lot to learn in the past 2-3 days. Education, yes, can influence the role of women. Absolutely, yes. Yes, so Aditya is giving example from various religious rituals, etc. For instance, you can talk about the practice of, say, Karwa Chauth, for instance. Then how religion can influence the role. We have given example of priest. Then you can think of the menstruation cycle and entry in temples, right? So in multiple ways, all these factors influence the role of women. Now the last one is modernity. Now, first thing is that we have to look into the aspects of modernity. Aspects of modernity include decline in significance of religion. Aspects of modernity include education for all. Aspects of modernity include democratic decentralization. Aspects of modernity include a breakdown or disintegration of the joint family and traditional family system. Aspects of modernity include better status and hence synonymous or hence a synchronous role of women for that matter. So all these factors can influence the role of women. Now, why did I say this? That you have to be aware that how various factors can influence the role of women. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. There can be other factors as well. You need not worry about those factors. All you have to do is focus on understanding. So Balaraju is suggesting that politics can also influence or change the role of women. As we were talking about the Women Reservation Act or Women Reservation Bill, that this will give more power to the women, etc. Okay, moving on. What we'll do now is we'll look at the traditional role of women And then we are going to look at the changing role of women, and we already know the factors. The factors like modernization, factors like urbanization, factors like globalization, how they are going to impact various dimensions of life of women. So this is also something that we have discussed. So we are going to discuss this briefly, and then we'll move on to various forms of challenges that women face, various forms of inequality that we find in Indian society. Before that, there is another idea of sex and gender. Now, this has to be ideally discussed with the concept of gender when it comes to third gender, which we are going to take up towards the end of our discussion in our last topic. But to understand it here, and this is something that you would have already understood, that sex is basically a biological concept. It is on the basis of your say genitals that you get your sex accorded. So you know that male members have different say biological features compared to female members of the society. But when it comes to gender, it is a socio-cultural concept. It has more to do with how society perceives you. So sex and gender are can be, or gender particularly can be looked in from the light of status and role. So for instance, if it's a girl, they are supposed to be, in quotes, supposed to be soft and soft spoken, for instance. They are supposed to be sensitive. Now, on the basis of their sex, on various biological, or the basis of biological features, it need not necessarily be the case. Every person, every individual has a different mindset. But ultimately, society expects you to be in a certain way, which is the idea of gender. So, whereas sex is basically natural, gender is social. Because biologically, you get your sex ascribed. You have your sex once you're born, naturally, biologically. But when it comes to gender, it is generally on the basis of ideas of society, that how society wants you to behave, what kind of role society wants you to take up. And also, when we say that gender is a sociological and socio-cultural concept, you can say that irrespective of your sex, irrespective of your biological features, you can fall in any gender bracket. So if there is, say, a boy, and you see that this happening in your school, etc., that if there is a boy who is, say, very sensitive, who is not violent, they get a different kind of gender identity ascribed to them, irrespective of their sexual or their biological features. This is what the difference in the ideas of sex and gender is. You can just go through this write up to understand it more. Now let's look at the traditional role of women. In traditional role, you find that they were limited to the household sphere. And again, Pritesh, we're talking about house queen, housewife. Then again, you cannot go on trying to be politically correct at all times, and it is not even expected from you. So all you have to focus is on understanding the concept. They're not going to say get you fixated to these ideas. Yes, obviously, it is a say more progressive idea. So the way there are say in language, what happens over time is that there'll be certain elements of prejudice that will enter. So when it comes to say any kind of say illegal practices, you find the word black attached to it, blacklisting someone, black marketing, black money, and you find that there is, say, a conflict regarding the same. That why is it called black money? Why the legal money or the tax paid money is called white money, and the money on which tax has not been paid is called black money? Why is it so? It could have been other way around. But now you see that they have, yes, having a discourse on this is important. Then also you have to realize that even your books, even your government uses the same terms. So whatever is there in general language, you are supposed to use the same. My experience with the examination is not something that you have to note directly. My experience with the examination is being shared through the discussions that we are having. when it comes to various aspects of the, say, of this particular paper. The way I was suggesting you to be, say, more vocal, to be more careful about words. So this is also coming from experience. To know about the, say, petty details of what kind of my exact personal experience was, it's not going to help you in any way, because you have a lot of videos, you have a lot of discussions of people who have cleared. I think that would be a better starting point. Okay, coming back to our idea. So when it comes to traditional role of women, we find them limited to the household sphere. We find them working within the confines of the boundaries of your home, within the confines of your home, and particularly unpaid labor. They were not supposed to perform any kind of paid labor in traditional Indian society. They were accorded a lower status. Whatever work, whatever efforts they were putting in, which were equivalent to the efforts put in by the male members of the society and the family, it was still considered to be unpaid. It was still considered to be of a lower status. This is what the traditional role of women was. And also, to a limited extent, particularly in your so-called lower caste, you find the role of women being extended a little to agriculture. So in your agrarian and traditional Indian society, the role of women was limited to that of a housewife, of that of a housemaker. But at times you'll find instances of them getting involved in agriculture, taking up, say, various other activities like weaving at times. They also took up working in others' homes of the so-called upper caste home because of the Jajmani arrangement, etc. So that was the traditional role of women. But if you look at the modern role of women and the changing role of women, we find that in every aspect of life, in every dimension, the role has been changing. Now, women are going out and working. Women are taking up business practices. Women are becoming entrepreneurs. They are also taking some kind of paid labor. So there are changes on the economic front, then there are changes on the political front as well. You find that on the political front, women also have the right to vote, and they also have the right to representation, which also depicts their changing role. Because in traditional society, even though, yes, you can say that no one for that matter had a say in terms of who will be the one who's going to take up the role, because it was a system of monarchy. But ultimately, we find that they had no such rights, which has now changed. When it comes to right to representation, you see that in your local panchayats and urban local bodies, in your PRIs and urban local bodies, they have a reservation. Similarly, now they have a reservation in parliament as well. Yes, it will take time. We know the details of the women reservation bill, but it can directly reflect on the political empowerment of women. Now, women are more vocal about their issues. Women are more vocal about their status in society, their role in society. Women are more vocal about all other social evils that still exist. Think of your Me Too movement. Think of various pressure groups being formed and run by women. Think of women fighting for their rights in society. All this shows levels of their social and political empowerment. Also, in the society, you find that now, with the breakdown of our joint family system, we have nuclear families wherein both male and female members have equal responsibilities. Both male and female members have equal authority. Yes, we know that having completely egalitarian society is a far-fetched idea, but yes, compared to the tradition in their society, they have made good efforts to improve the status of women. Similarly, when it comes to their environmental role, now women are also becoming part of various movements to save, preserve environment. So in every aspect, in every dimension of their life, and you can think of many more. So women are now the rules of spouse selection. Now we are saying that both the girl and the boy, they have more autonomy over the decision when it comes to marrying. Instances of child marriage and early marriage are gone. When it comes to sati, it has been abolished. When it comes to dowry, the demands have decreased a bit. Yes, we see that we still find a lot of people still demanding dowry from the family of the girl, but the practice is on a decline. Similarly, you find the sex ratios have improved, as we have already seen. So, in every dimension of life, the role of women is changing. Yes, so the parda pratha or the parda system is also on a decline. Pritesh, rather than a question, it is more of a statement that you have made, which says that women dominated society is progressive. So, the moment you use the word domination, the idea of progressiveness is gone. It is not about domination. It is about providing everyone with equal opportunity. Yes, you cannot control the outcomes, obviously, but at least everyone should get to have equal opportunity. So when you say, when you use the term dominated, it simply dissolves the idea of being progressive. That is what it means. And I think, Pradesh, you just hold on to the till the end, and a lot of your ideas will become clear, right? So Aditya is asking why society has so much disrespect towards black people. Doesn't it promote racism? That means black, white is good. Yes. So yes, every society has their own prejudices. Yes, we can break them down, but it takes time. It takes efforts. It takes various social movements. But most importantly, it needs awareness. Because when we think about the idea of empowerment, it starts from within. Can anyone think about the difference between empowerment and development? Can anyone think about this? What is the difference between development and empowerment? Because government doesn't talk about development of women, they talk about empowerment. But we somehow mix up all these ideas. When we think of development, it is something that is being handed over to you. It can be top bottom, bottom up, but ultimately there'll be a lot of intervention from outside. But when it comes to empowerment, it starts from within. The person uh, under question, the person under question, they have to first realize that they are at a disadvantage compared to others. Because think about it. Think about your mother, think about your grandmother. Do you think they care about gender equality when it comes to the matter of kitchen? Don't you think, with all the love and care that they prepare your food, they help you with other things, do you think that they have all these, say, blurred and confused ideas of gender equality, women empowerment, etc.? And the answer is no, because they have been used to it. The first stage would be to make them realize that you are at a disadvantage, relative disadvantage, compared to someone else. For that, you have to break down the traditions. For that, you have to question the existing social institutions. You have to question the existing social practices, and everything takes time. So the question about the a particular race, a particular gender, people coming from a particular religion, ethnicity, etc., yes, all those questions are valid, but everything takes time. Okay, we'll compare these ideas of development and empowerment again when we discuss poverty. We'll come back to the idea of development, because also we find that development is considered to be a major force in alleviating poverty. And if you think about this, if you try writing answers about what can be the consequences of alleviation of poverty and what can be the consequences of development, you'll find your answer to be similar. So, Pradesh, you are asking a question that feminism is good or bad. These are very subjective topics and way beyond the, say, scope of our subject. Yes, we can definitely go on discussing on these ideas, right? But again, these are very subjective ideas. And one thing that you have to understand is that you have to be value neutral. When we were looking at any kind of impact of any force of change, we were talking about both negatives and positives, trying to balance the thing. And if my personal views are all that matter to you, I can say yes, feminism is good. They're demanding their rights. But there are multiple ways in which they can demand their rights. There are multiple ways in which you can look at women empowerment. So all those ideas will have subjectivity, and they're way beyond the scope of our discussion here. Okay, moving on. So we see that the role of women in the contemporary society is changing. Now, with this changing role, we find that new challenges are arising. A few challenges have been there and they still exist. So there has been a continuity when it comes to various challenges being faced by women, and then also you find changes or newer challenges coming up when it comes to women. So we have to think about both. We do not have to think about which of the issues have maintained a continuity, but we have to include both the issues which have been there since long and also newer challenges that are coming up. So please remember this. What are solutions? What are solutions to what? What are solutions to these issues? Solutions to these issues are mentioned in the slides, and we are going to discuss them one by one. So please wait for the discussion to say move forward, and we are going to discuss those suggestions and what can be the solutions one by one. And again, remember, and I think you have not been there since the first class, I mentioned this very clearly, that when it comes to social issues and society, not everything goes as planned. It is not, for instance, I'll ask you a question. If you think in that direction, dowry is a practice which was abolished by law, but we still find it prevalent. What can be the reason behind it? Don't you find that dowry is still prevalent on a very wide scale till today, even though it has been abolished by law? Because generally, when thinking from paper 2 perspective, thinking from constitutional and political perspective, we think if a law is made, changes will flow. But it is not always the case, because society works on different logics. There are multiple factors which affect your decision. Your decision to join civil services or to start preparing for civil services is motivated by multiple factors. The way you have been brought up, your socialization, the impact of mass media, the impact of various, the crash in the private sector. There are multiple reasons which impact your decisions, etc. So we cannot always say that this is the particular reason behind this. We'll always have an array of reasons. Also, when we think of the status of women and the role of women, you have to remember that it is being impacted by multiple factors, as we have discussed, like religion, like caste, like family, marriage, etc. And also, you'll find that when you move from one society to another, these factors will have a varied, intensity. One can take precedent over the other. The way we were saying that technology took a precedent over, or say an advantage over other factors when it comes to, say, sex ratio at birth. Similarly, you'll find that in a few societies, religion is given the most importance. Then there can be other societies where the traditions of the family take precedence over anything else. So these factors will have a varied degree of effect on the role of women, on status of women. But the idea is that the role of women is ultimately changing because of all these factors. And with this changing role, we find, because every change will have its consequence, it can be both positive and negative. So we have to see that with this changing role, what are the consequences on women? And we have to look at it from the light, in the light of issues. Okay, so you think always according to the expectations of our freedom fighters. But don't you think there were many freedom fighters? The freedom movement, for that matter, had a lot of people coming from varied backgrounds. Today itself, we were talking about the conflict of views or the conflict of ideas between Tagore and Gandhi, but both were freedom fighters. Similarly, you can find a conflict between the ideas of Bhagat Singh and Gandhi. At the same time, you'll find a conflict in ideas of Bose and Bhagat Singh and Gandhi and Dr. Ambedkar. So ultimately, you see that there are multiple factors which impact your role, your ideas, your status in the society, etc. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to take up issues related to women. Now, when you think of issues related to women, think of these ideas in form of inequality. The way we were saying, when it comes to ownership of property, there is inequality. Compared to men, there is less number of women who hold any kind of property. Similarly, when it comes to household responsibilities, it is generally the women who have all the responsibility, who have the burden of entire work on them. When it comes to, say, political inequality, look at the representation of women in our parliament, in our legislature. Also, you'll find various other forms of inequality. So when we are looking at gender, particularly role of women, we are going to look at various form of inequality as a consequence of changing role of women. These form of gender inequality are a consequence of changing role of women, so that you do not think of it as a digression from role of women. These are the consequences of changing role of women. Now also, you would have found the gender gap report recently in the news. This is there. So what you have to do is whenever there are issues related to women or anything in the newspaper, take a paper, keep a paper with you, and keep mentioning them. So for instance, women reservation bill. For instance, it was in the news that the Karnataka Assembly has has no representation of women, the newly formed Karnataka Assembly. So some or the other thing will keep coming, be it on the economic front, be it on the social front, be it on the political front. Keep mentioning them on a piece of paper, and keep that paper along with your notes for role of women, because you are going to need more and more number of examples. Because the way they have asked a question about empowerment of women and population growth, yes, in abstract terms, we know that empowerment of women means empowerment in all the dimensions of life, and ultimately they'll be better decision makers, etc. But to substantiate, you'll always need stats, you'll always need examples. That how is it that you can say, if you educate women, it will lead to a lower fertility rate? How do you substantiate that? To substantiate that, you'll need these things from current affairs. So from this gender parity or gender gap report, you find that India has not been faring well when it comes to gender parity. You have to go through this. I have left the article here. Please go through this. Look at the position of India. What are the factors in gender gap report? What are the indices that they have used? And what are the reasons they have cited? Please go through this link and you will be able to understand this easily. What we'll do now is we'll start looking at these forms of inequality one by one. Before that, let's take up a question which says, democracy gives equal opportunity. Not necessarily. Do you think, just think of, there's a possibility that you might have someone as a house help. Yes, there is democracy. Do you think they get equal opportunity to get in a regular institution or an educational institution, or they have an equal opportunity, or it is say equal when it comes to preparing for civil services? If you compare the children of your house help with yourself, do you think democracy has brought about that equality? And the answer would be no. Even within the same class group, we'll find that yes, people might be coming, or students might be coming from different classes in terms of your wealth, your income, etc. There can be students who might have started at an early age and they have sufficient resources, they can sustain their preparation for 4 long years. There can be students who are working on a very thin margin. All they had has been invested here in this course, in this classroom, in this examination, in this idea, in this dream, and they might have only a span of 1.5 years. Do you think there is complete absolute equality for that matter? So the idea is, yes, democracy gives you political equality, but it is always conditional. And we have been discussing this right from the beginning, And I think I had asked you a question that, do you think your merit is your own making? Because there is a lot of hubris around merit. There's a lot of cry that only the meritorious should prevail. Do you think that your merit completely depends on yourself? Is it your own making? Don't you think there are a lot of socioeconomic factors which decide merit? There can be factors related directly to birth. There can be people who are born with a disability. There can be people who might have a lower IQ naturally. So all these ideas, these ideas should ideally find place in your ethics paper. And if we go on digressing from the topic, it will become a problem, right? So yes, wherever a digression is required, wherever I have to make you understand something using ethical perspective, I do that. But let's not do this very often, because otherwise it'll sound like an ethics lecture, which it is not. It is related to paper 1 and 2, that is the social issues in justice. I try to address your questions as far as they are related to the confines of this subject. Okay, let's start with the first form of inequality. And again, I would say that we would not be able to cover these inequalities, but let's cover whichever form of inequality we can. And please do go through this link. Please go through this gender gap report. Okay, so the first form of inequality is your natality inequality. Natality, you can relate it directly to birth. Just now we had discussed in our chapter on population that when it comes to matters of birth, women or girls have a disadvantage. Why? Because the sex ratio at birth, the sex ratio in children is as low as 929 per 1,000 boys. And we have already discussed various factors responsible for the same. We have also discussed that not just that this sex ratio at birth is low, also we find that it is on a decline in a few states. And we had highlighted those states. You can look at the data. You'll find that in states like Bihar, in states like a couple of northeastern states, in states like Kerala, it is on a decline. So yes, a lot of states are faring well when it comes to matters of sex ratio at birth. The sex ratio at birth is improving in most of the states, but then there are a few states where it is declining. That is what inequality in matters of birth. How do you address that? You have a scheme of Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, right? Which can directly target this. But then again, you have to remember all these government schemes will have issues related to design, will have issues related to implementation, will have issues related to budgetary allocation, etc., etc. All those issues will be covered comprehensively when we come to the last part of our lectures. Maybe on 4th of November, we'll be able to take it up, where we are going to discuss issues related to design and implementation. So the inequality when it comes to women, the gender inequality starts right at birth. And if I ask you this question, that throughout the life cycle of women, they face various forms of inequalities, they face various forms of violence. Can you answer this kind of question? Because what I've done is I've created a question on the same thing. And you find that throughout their life cycle, be it in the matters of birth, be it in the matters of death, be it in the matters of property, be it in the matters of work, in every place you find inequality, which is portrayed very well from the data that I've used from NFHS 5. Now, the next form of inequality is inequality when it comes to mortality. One idea is that women are the ones who are more vulnerable to violent activities. They get sexually abused, they get harassed at workplace, they get harassed in public, they face violence sitting at home. Now the violence is not just limited to physical violence, they become objects of mental and psychological trauma. They become objects of cybercrime. So they are not even safe within the confines of their home, within the confines of their room. Also, when it comes to Mortality inequality, we find that the maternal mortality rate is very high, close to 103 per lakh population, per lakh live births. If you compare it with other countries like Bhutan, Sri Lanka, they have it way less than 50. The numbers way less than 50. So there is inequality, there is gender inequality when it comes to matters of mortality. Also, this shows spousal and domestic violence against women, that there are a lot of states where it is on a rise. Look at the state of Karnataka, it is on a rise. Look at the state of Maharashtra, it is on a rise. So yes, most of the states have been taking care of or tackling this problem of domestic violence and spousal violence, but you find a few states where it is on a rise, like states like Sikkim, etc. What can you do about it? You can think of government intervention, and it is not just limited to this. So as an answer to all the problems of inequality against women or the gender inequality, we'll find that you have to think about government intervention. Then you also have to think about role of civil society, because with increasing role of civil society can make women aware. If women form an organization and they say that yes, let's take up an economic activity for economic betterment, for a better social status, all these things can happen. All those things will be covered with suggestions. All those things are fairly understandable. What I've done is I've just given you a few examples. So to curb this domestic violence, the first thing that you have to do is you have to strike down on the patriarchal form of our family. You have to make, or you have to sensitize people about equal rights to everyone. You have to make society and families more and more egalitarian. You have to run awareness programs, etc. So for every form of inequality, we'll have a government intervention. We can also think about various other suggestions. Just please tell me this thing: do you want me to write all these suggestions, or you'll be able to make them up on your own? Please suggest. Okay, so most of you say that yes, these suggestions are pretty much understandable. They follow from the form of gender inequality that is there, and most of the government schemes have been mentioned here. And also towards the end, I'll add a link, and I think I've already added the link of various schemes related to women empowerment and all of the things. And rest can be covered directly from your current affairs. So let's do one thing, because it's already 8. It's just 1 minute to 8. Let's conclude our discussion here till mortality inequality. All the other forms of inequality will be taken up tomorrow. With this, we will move on towards other issues, other newer issues that are coming up, issues related to health, education, etc. And then we are going to discuss a couple of questions related to gender, particularly to women, because when it comes to gender inequality, it is not just limited to women, it also covers it also covers the third gender. But third gender is going to be taken up separately, because the chapter is on role of women, and rather changing role of women, and what kind of problems arise with this changing role of women. So let's take up our discussion tomorrow. The class tomorrow starts at morning 10 and will go on till the same time, that is 8. Just in case anyone is confused about the timing, tomorrow the class starts at 10 a.m. Okay, so if you have any questions left, we are going to take up those questions tomorrow. Do not worry about the same. And see you tomorrow. Thank you for your patience today. Please try to revise it before we start with the session tomorrow. Otherwise, you'll forget this. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and good night.